This is a continuation of a reading of the second Gorgias, a sequel to Plato's Gorgias, which is part of a collection of dialogues I have written as sequels to Plato's dialogues. In this section, Socrates is presented as making a more complete and final refutation of Gorgias's argument that nothing exists. In the previous section, he had been shown to resolve the difficulties that had seemed to follow from Gorgias's hypothesis that if being is, it must have come to be or be ungenerated. In which, according to him, according to his argument, since being could neither have come to be nor be ungenerated, being cannot exist. His argument was that if being had come to be, it must have come to be from being or from non-being. But being could not have come to be from non-being, since something can't come from nothing without a reason and a cause. Neither, he says, could being have come to be from being, since in that case, being would undergo a change and would no longer be what it is. Or, as I supplement for his argument, that what pre-exists the process of generation could not have come to be. If being came to be from being, being would pre-exist the process of coming to be, and so wouldn't have come to be. From there, he says that since being could neither have come to be from being nor from non-being, being could not have come to be. And to that, Socrates does not object. He says, however, if being were ungenerated, then it couldn't have had a beginning, as what hasn't come to be has no beginning. But since a beginning is a limit, neither would being be limited. Being would be unlimited if without a beginning. But what is unlimited is infinite. So being, if unlimited, would also be infinite. And none of this Socrates objects to. However, then Gorgias says that what is infinite could not be anywhere, could not be in any place. And since what is must be somewhere, and what is nowhere is nothing, if being infinite, could not be anywhere, then being wouldn't exist. That is the premise that Socrates objects to. A premise adopted from the arguments of Zeno, where he says that since anything that is must be somewhere and in some place, place too, if that is, must be somewhere and in some other place. And that place must be in something else ad infinitum to show that place does not exist. That is the difficulty that Socrates objects to. By arguing that place does not need to be in yet some other place. Which he concludes from arguing that the limit of what is limited doesn't itself have to have a limit in something else. Because as surfaces are the limits of bodies, bodies are limited by surfaces, that is. Yet surfaces are limited by something else, and indeed are within something else. That is lines. Surfaces are limited by and within lines. Yet lines also, being the limits of surfaces, are limited by something else, that is points. Points, being without interval, are neither within anything else nor are limited by anything else. There are no limits of points. There is no interval of a point to be within or limited by anything else, as there is of surfaces to be limited by and within lines, and lines to be limited by and within points. Points, however, being the limits of lines, are not limited by anything else. So also place, or what something is within, doesn't have to be within something else, though some of them may be. As also the argument goes, the end for the sake of which we choose to do something which we would otherwise not choose to do, the end for which we endure pains which we would otherwise not choose, is not for the sake of anything else. Those other things, the means, are for the sake of the end, but the end is not for the sake of anything else and does not have as its end something yet else. The end for the sake of which we endure pains which we would otherwise not choose to endure has no other end outside of itself. It is the end of the others without having an end in something else. As a limit, just as points, being the limits of lines, are themselves without limits and are not within any other order of magnitude. So the argument goes that place does not, if place exists, place does not have to be in some yet other place, or at least there is some place, a terminus of that progression, which is the place of the others without having to itself be in something else. In order that being, if ungenerated, without beginning, unlimited and infinite, does not have to be in anything in order to be, and that not everything that is has to be in some place or in something else, so that there is no problem. The problem is resolved, which was thought to follow from the hypothesis that being is ungenerated. The company decide that Socrates has only resolved the particulars of that argument without himself positively asserting or completely refuting the contradictory position held by Gorgias. And so in what follows in this section, Socrates is shown to more completely and more finally refute Gorgias's argument that nothing exists. And what follows is a perfect example of a priori reasoning, of a priori metaphysics. Which is evident because in the argument from this section, there is a sort of simplicity which was lacking due to the complexity of the prior section. But the prior section also consisted of wholly a priori reasoning, analytic or synthetic. Probably analytic, but that gets somewhere. In this section, Socrates asks Gorgias if he is willing to admit that when saying that something is not real, do we mean anything other than that it doesn't exist? So that he has to admit that what is not real, and that what is real. Gorgias had argued that since what is not is what is not, or since non-being is non-being, non-being is. A very sophistical argument. But in order to contend with, we have to go about things in this way. We have to get out of the confined, the confines of merely two contradictory terms, existence and non-existence, or what is and what is not. And we need to find a middle term outside of those to show that non-being doesn't exist and that being exists. We have to find a middle term. And so we say that what is not real, or that what the only thing we mean by saying something is not real is that it doesn't exist. And when we say that something is real, we mean that it exists. That gives us a sort of space to triangulate with a middle term. And taking another step, Socrates asked Gorgias to admit that what is not is nothing. That what is not is the same as nothing. And that what is the same as something. So that we get to the point where an assertion can be made that states that what is not is unreal and nothing. What is not real and nothing. And that what is real and something. So that Gorgias has to admit that what is not, if what is not real and nothing, then what is not cannot exist. And that if what is real and something, then what is cannot not exist. I find that to be a perfect example of a priori reasoning, which indeed is everywhere in ancient philosophy. Significant also in this section is that Socrates begins to wonder if Gorgias might actually be in earnest in his argument that nothing exists. For his position aligns in direct opposition with the decree of Parmenides that states that never allow this way of thinking that says that what is not, and that what is not is. Gorgias is the only person that has gone directly against that, taken that at face value and stated the contradictory. So Socrates thinks maybe Gorgias isn't just giving a rhetorical display in order to showcase his talent in oratory and making an argument, where showing that he can make an argument that makes the weaker argument appear the stronger. Yeah, no, maybe he actually is holding this position. But there is something else going on when he is making a direct, he's the only person that has directly gone against Parmenides, that one of Parmenides' statements. Not to do with his monism or anything like that. His statement that what is cannot not be, and that what is not cannot be. For that is what Gorgias is arguing, that nothing exists, and that being does not exist. And also he says that non-being exists. So I wanted to summarize the previous argument because the dialogue can, although a good form of presentation, can make these arguments seem complex, or the argument was complex in the previous section. And that is why Socrates is not done and is not allowed to leave off refuting Gorgias's argument that nothing exists. So to begin with this section, Callicles. You have not, Socrates, proved that something must exist, yet you have dispelled the difficulties that Gorgias said would result from the previous hypotheses. Most, if not the rest, of his vast array of arguments that prove that nothing exists remain unresolved. Socrates. But can that not always be said in defense of the refutation of an argument which is structured in such a way as to presume that if something exists, such as motion or anything else, one of two contraries must be true, such as that motion must be either continuous or discrete, and then, assuming each of them in turn, reduces both of the hypotheses to absurdity, leaving the only inference that doesn't result in absurdity to be that the thing in question, for example, motion, doesn't exist. I assume your meaning is that if I were to show that continuous motion, again, for example, does not result in the absurdities which the argument concludes, then that would be insufficient to prove that either motion in general exists or that motion is continuous. Callicles. That, I think, is what I mean to say. Socrates. Then let us turn from the previous argument as from impassable roads, which seem rather to have been adopted from the arguments of previous figures and to have combined them in ways in which they seem to contradict each other. For Zeno and Melissus, who were generally in agreement yet argued for the same thing from different angles, seem to have provided a storehouse of premises and propositions in general, which Gorgias here seems to have set against themselves in a strange way. Let us turn away from all that and towards an argument of Gorgias's, of his own, that seems to have been entirely his own unique invention. Callicles. Whether your opinion of the previous arguments is fair or not, I should leave ignored for now so as to prevent distraction. Socrates. But Gorgias, something comes to my mind. Recall the decree of Parmenides. He said, I think, to never follow the way of thinking that says, what is not, and what is not is. I wonder if he, and specifically that statement of his, is not the target of your argument. For you go directly against that in a way that none other before you has. Perhaps there is more to your argument than a rhetorical exhibition, even without your entirely supporting and believing the claims you make. Gorgias, yes, that is directly opposed to my thesis. Socrates, there are two ways of interpreting his decree that I was aware of before hearing your writings read, but now I have learned of a third. For you don't so much stand opposed to the two others, but to the blatant meaning at face value that I had overlooked. Gorgias, which do you mean? Socrates, the first interpretation, which I assume Parmenides primarily meant when he said never to permit the path of inquiry that says that what is not, and that what is not is that what is couldn't have come to be from what is not. For he says elsewhere, if nothing was, what could have compelled something to come to be, and why then rather than before or after? The assumption being that if something comes to be, it must come to be from something. Or in other words, there has to be a cause, which is the reason for something's coming to be. And it couldn't have come to be from nothing without a cause for coming to be and without a reason for coming to be. That is altogether most important for his argument. But that is not the interpretation of Parmenides that you contradict. Gorgias, no, it is not. Socrates. Then secondly, there is the interpretation of the same statement, this time that something can't be and not be at the same time. And I don't mean anything profound in this case, but something irreplaceably valuable to discourse and philosophy. That something can't be and not be such and such at the same time and in the same way. This interpretation Protagoras contradicts, but you leave it untouched and unviolated. For under this interpretation, Parmenides is saying that something can't both be and not be white or equal or anything else at the same time. Or in other words, that if something is rectilinear, then it cannot not be rectilinear. If something is rectilinear, it cannot not be rectilinear. Or again, that if something is not rectilinear, then it cannot be rectilinear. Not at the same time and not in the same sense. This, I think, must be what Parmenides means when he says that it is impossible for being not to be, and it is impossible for non-being to be. And again, that this shall never be, that the things that are not are. And perhaps also when he says that it is impossible to say or think that being is not. It is impossible to say or think that being is not. Protagoras, however, as we have already noted, says that something can be such and such to one person and not be the same such and such to someone else at the same time. And we know that is just the path which Parmenides warned against when he said, wandering herds, deaf and blind, for whom being and non-being are judged to be the same and yet not the same. But we need not bring Protagoras back into the picture. Gorgias. That is not so much the target of my thesis either. Socrates. And before hearing your thesis, those were the only interpretations of Parmenides' statement that I was aware of. I didn't so much as imagine that anyone would attempt to strike that tenet of his at face value. Again, Parmenides said in warning, never to allow this course of thinking that being is not and that non-being is. Or in other words, that what is not and that what is not is. You, however, take that head on, and as one man crashing, you, however, take that head on as one man rushing ahead crashes through the enemy's lines and proclaim boldly that nothing exists and that being is not. Whereas others have gone against the interpretations of his same statement and have said that something can come from nothing, that something can come to be from nothing, or as Protagoras declares, that the same can both be and not be such and such at the same time. You take the more abrupt route, and taking his words at face value, declare that non-being is and that being is not. Gorgias. That is a quite correct observation, Socrates, that my thesis is the direct inverse of his. Socrates. And whereas before I wondered if you were just making a rhetorical display of your talent at making a difficult argument, now I wonder if you aren't quite in earnest and deliberately attacking Parmenides. Gorgias. One might have multiple motives, Socrates. Socrates. In any case, although you opposed almost every philosopher before you, and indeed all of mankind, Parmenides would be more apt than any to contend with you, for only he do you directly contradict. Gorgias, again, you are right to point out that my argument is the direct inverse of his. If he were alive today, he would undoubtedly see it that way. Socrates, then suppose he were to interrogate you and not I. I will play the part and merely voice what he would be likely to say in response to all this. Gorgias, that is fine. Go on then. He would say, I imagine, Gorgias, most famous and wealthy of all the sophists of your day. Is this not your claim? You say, do you not, that since non-being is non-being, non-being simply is? Gorgias, that is what I say. Socrates, would you also say that non-being is the same and another word for what is not? Gorgias, I would. Socrates, then might we replace the words non-being in that proposition with what is not, without changing the meaning? Gorgias, I suppose we could. Socrates, then the proposition would read, what is not is what is not. Gorgias, it would. Socrates, now we are asking about what is not, whether that is or is not. In order to avoid redundancy, are we permitted to reformulate the proposition to read, what is not is not? Gorgias, I am under the impression that the proposition in that form might not be the same. Socrates, then imagine that Parmenides is still questioning you, and that I am only relating what he would say. Gorgias, that is indeed a very fanciful thing to imagine, Socrates. Socrates, could anyone deny that what is real? Gorgias, none could deny that. Socrates, and don't we also say that what is not real? Gorgias, we do. Socrates, and we say that what is something? Gorgias, that what is something, yes. Socrates. And what is not is nothing? Gorgias. Yes. Socrates. You say, do you not, that since what is not is what is not simply is? Gorgias. That is what I say. Socrates. Then if what is not or non-being is, what it is not real and nothing. Gorgias. Still, I would maintain that what is not or non-being is, even then. Socrates. But what is not would not, as you say, exist no less than what is. For what is real and something. But what is not real and nothing. Gorgias. I would account for that by saying that both equally are, but are different things. Socrates. And one of them, being, is real, and the other, non-being, is not real. Gorgias. That might be said. Socrates. And what is something, while what is not is nothing. Gorgias. We agreed to that. Socrates. Then can what is not real and nothing be equal in terms of being as what is real and something? Gorgias. I don't quite know how I would like to respond to the question. Socrates. Well, imagine that Parmenides were then to ask you if the measure of being and existence is not more real and less real. Gorgias. That is fair enough. Socrates. Does not, he would say, that which is more real is that which is more real have a greater claim to existing than that which is less real? Or could you possibly contend that what is less real exists equally as what is more real? Gorgias. Well, my original claim was that what is not really is what is not, and that what is really is what is. Socrates. But what is real is the same as what is, but what is real is the same as what is. Gorgias. Yes. Socrates. And what is unreal or not real is the same as what is not? Or do we mean anything else by calling something not real than that it doesn't exist? Gorgias. I admit that. Socrates. And what is unreal and is not is also the same as nothing. And what is unreal and is not is also the same as nothing. Gorgias. That also. Socrates. Then is there any avoiding the conclusion that what is not or non-being doesn't exist if what is not real and nothing? Or could what is not real and nothing exist? Gorgias. I am compelled to agree, Socrates. Socrates. I think, Gorgias, that Parmenides would have more to ask you on this point. Gorgias. What would he say? Socrates. He would, I imagine, ask you again, if what is not is the same as unreal, how would you reply? Gorgias. I would assent. Socrates. And he would then ask you, if your claim is not that since what is not is what is not, or in other words, since non-being is non-being, that what is not or non-being is. Gorgias. That is my claim. Socrates. But what is the same as real? Gorgias. Yes. Then the result is that what is not is both real and unreal. The result is that what is not is both real and unreal. Is that not true? Gorgias, according to the argument, Socrates. And we said that what is not is the same as unreal. Gorgias, we said that. Socrates, then also what is unreal will be real. But is that possible? Gorgias, that is a great difficulty. Socrates, a great difficulty indeed. For if what is unreal is to be real, then what is unreal won't be unreal. But if unreal is anything, it has to be unreal. Else the very word unreal would be reft of meaning. Gorgias, yes. That what is unreal is not unreal is even more obviously an impossibility than that what is not real is real. Socrates, really, Gorgias, this sort of mess requires our invoking Heracles to clean the stables. Gorgias, let Heracles be invoked, for I am in a mess with your arguments, as also you perhaps find with mine. Socrates, now, we agree that what is not is the same as nothing, do we not? Gorgias, we do. Socrates, but you say that since what is not is what is not, or that non-being is non-being, what is not or non-being is. Gorgias, I say that. Socrates, but what is the same as something? Gorgias, yes. What is must be something. Socrates, then the result is that what is not or non-being is nothing and something, or really that what is nothing is something. Gorgias, the same problem you probably think as before. Socrates, and again, if nothing is something, then nothing is not nothing. I don't think there is a sharper contradiction than that. And if we deny that nothing is nothing, then how could we say anything else about nothing? That, for instance, it is something. Gorgias, I am at a loss with that contradiction, Socrates. Socrates, and when you say that being is not, and we have agreed that being is the same as real, and what is not is the same as unreal, then what is real will be unreal. But what is real cannot be unreal if what is real is to be real, and that cannot be denied. For if what is real is not real, we cannot go on talking about what is real, saying that it is something else, especially its opposite, and calling it by the same name. We would rather be talking about something else, or the discourse would be completely lost. And if, as you say, being is not, and being is something, but what is not is nothing, then something will be nothing. But something cannot be nothing if we are to affirm that something is something. For again, if something is not something, then our discourse will be shipwrecked, for something has to be something. Gorgias, I follow the argument. Socrates, Parmenides would also say this to you, Gorgias. If you say that what is not is, because what is not is what is not will then not be what is not. And if you say that what is not, then what is will not be what is. In other words, non-being will not be non-being if non-being is, and being will not be being if being is not. Yet that was the first premise of your argument. And if we couldn't say that being is being and non-being is non-being, all would be confounded and confused, like the chaos of Anaxagoras, an unsortable and indiscernible mixture. Callias, You have very, Callias, you have very impressively resolved the current dilemma, Socrates. However, rather than pressing Gorgias on this point, why don't you advance to his second claim? For what is most daring about his thesis is that he goes on from his claim that nothing exists to claim also that even if anything exists, nothing could be known. And then conceding the prior stage of the argument and taking that concession as a hypothesis says also that even if anything exists and can be known, still even then it couldn't be said. Gorgias, you discern clearly the unique nature of my argument, Callias. For even if I should make a concession that something exists, the thesis as a whole then takes that hypothesis and refutes the possibility that anything can be known or said. Nor do those who find shock that I argue that nothing exists comprehend the gravity of the whole argument, as the successive stages go even further when compounded sequentially. Socrates, and I count myself among those who find the first stage of the argument that nothing exists to be so shocking that I fail to comprehend the gravity of the subsequent stages, that using the concession of the first point as a hypothesis, then refute the possibility of knowledge and meaningful discourse. But neither am I able to recollect on my own the course of the second stage of the argument. So be kind enough to remind me how that part of the argument went. I am only able to recollect without being reminded that you said that even if anything exists, it couldn't be known. Remind me again how that is. I will stop there.